In continuing what we've been doing in Kings, I'm now in 1 Kings 19. We have been looking at Elijah's contest, uh, setting forth Yahweh as Lord against Baal. Now we're in 19, where Elijah flees from Jezebel and her vengeance and goes to the wilderness of Paran. So he flees to Beersheba, and I'm beginning at verse 1. I'll read 1 to 3. It says, V'yaged Achav le'Izebel et kol asher asa Eliyahu. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. But et kol asher harag, and what happens as a result, Jezebel then sent a messenger unto Elijah. V'tishlach Izebel malach el Eliyahu lemor, let the gods do to me ko ya'asun Elohim v'cho yosifun, and more, if I make not your life, and so forth. In other words, it's a threat on his life. Uh, and so he runs to Beersheba, and in verse 3 it reads, Vayar, Vayakim, Vayelek el Nafsho. When he saw that, he arose and went for his life, Vayavo Beersheba, and came to Beersheba, Asher Lihuda, which belongs to Judah, Vayanach et Naharosham, and he left his servant there. So after the contest of Mount Carmel, and after Elijah had entered the city of Jezreel, full of exhilaration over the day's events and hope for the future of the northern kingdom, a message, though, from the angry queen, uh, vowing to take his life speedily, he changed his mood at once from joy to depression and fear. Why did she send a message? Uh, Probably either she did not trust the temper of the common people, or else she had no such power and conceivably had been told by Ahab to control herself. We may speculate that she did the next best thing to give him such a frightening experience as to send him into hiding, perhaps permanently. The threat produced the intended effect, for Elijah's face suddenly failed. He lost his nerve and fled out of the northern kingdom into the southernmost part of Judah, at Beersheba, at the edge of the desert. Even there, he either felt uneasy lest he be attacked by the queen's agents, or else he felt an overpowering need for solitude, for reflection, for enlightenment, for prayer, and a renewing of the spirit, since the queen had threatened his life. Perhaps he felt both. Dismissing his servant, he decided to seek refuge in the mountains further south. Why did the Lord or did Elijah suffer the loss of confidence? It appears that his sudden reversal of mental states arose from an overconfidence inspired by the miracles done by the Lord on Mount Carmel, and by the momentary enthusiasm of the Israelites who were witnesses there. And so he remained steadfast and immovable at one time. However, the mind of Elijah changed. He had been thrust into the center of the stage and put into the role of hero of the drama. Then, when the curtain had gone down and the applause had died out, he had been left to himself. In the morning light of the next day, with Jezebel's message at hand and no visible support against the danger that was implicit, the prophet could not face the future with a martyr's spirit of acceptance of whatever God might bring. And he fled, and he wanted to hide himself. Now, Elijah at Mount Horeb is what we see next, and we're going to see this in verses 4 to 18. And so, as we read that, he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat under a broom tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, "It is enough. O Lord, take away my life." In other words, he is asking that he might die. For I am not better than my fathers. It is interesting. Elijah went on from Beersheba a day's journey into the desert, and there rested under a broom tree. The broom bush is a common desert shrub or bush which grows up to 10 or 12 feet and casts a shade for man to rest under. When he says, "Take away my life," in verse 4, he is in serious depression. He asks God to take his life. He realizes that he is going to die someday like his fathers. And so, having said to God, "Kach nafshi," for I am no better than my fathers, "Ki lo tov anochi me avotai," he laid down and he slept under the broom tree, and we're told that an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." Zemalach nogea bo veyomer lo kum acho. So the angel is now bringing comfort. Elijah's gracious God did not lose sight of his runaway servant, but watched over him and miraculously ministered to his wants. The angel is called the angel of the Lord. Since in the scriptures this title includes divinity, see Judges 13:17 to 23. It may be that this was the second person of the Trinity in pre-incarnate condition who would come to minister to Elijah. So as we continue in verses 6 and following, he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on the hot stone, and a cruse of oil. We're seeing a miracle. And he did eat and drink, and laid himself down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time, and touched him, and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." So he arose and he ate and he had something to drink and went in the strength of that meal 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of God. So it reads that he went Arba'im Yom va'arba'im Laila ad har ha-Elohim Horeb. After the angel had fed the prophet Elijah a second time, he went into Horeb, traveling 40 days and nights without food. Horeb and Sinai are names given in different Old Testament passages to the same mountain. Traditionally, Sinai or Horeb is regarded as being the peak called Jabal Musa in the mountains in the south apex of the triangularly shaped Sinai Peninsula. However, either location can also be nominated and supported and is by scholars, notably a mountain west of Kadesh Barnea and another northwest Arabia. While the traditional site fits the wilderness journey of Israel well, one cannot be finally decisive about the exact location. In any case, in the solitude of Sinai Horeb, God appears to instruct Elijah. What are you doing here, Elijah? Was a searching question addressed to one who had been called to an urgent mission to Israel. And here he lay, far away from where he should be. Elijah then attempts a defense in verse 10. It is interesting to note that the mountain of the Lord was in the south, the opposite direction of the mountain of Baal, Mount Nephon, which was in the north. And so Elijah said, I've been very jealous for the Lord of hosts. Verse 10. For the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant and thrown down your altars and slain your prophets with the sword, and only I am left, and they seek my life. And he said, Go forth and stand upon the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by. And this is a very interesting uh, spectacle here as we read this. By an awesome exhibition of divine power, Elijah was made aware of the divine speaker. His attention was arrested. His problem and depression was silenced. His heart was touched. On this occasion, there was a strong wind and an earthquake and a fire. But the Lord was not in any of these. This, then, was unlike Sinai, where the Lord spoke, I should say, out of the smoke and fire. Exodus 19:18-25. Here, his voice was literally the sound of thin silence, the sound of a light or soft whisper. So God ordered Elijah to return north and carry forward the Lord's work there. It's interesting as we think about life. Often the Lord speaks in that which is very quiet, not always in what we would sometimes want a direct voice from heaven in a real audible way, but quiet in the soul. It's interesting, but after the earthquake of fire, it said the Lord was in Kol Demama Daka. He was in a still, small voice, a voice demama and still. And so what a thought here when we think about often God speaks, and it's not maybe the way we would expect it sometimes. And so we're told in verse 13, he wrapped his face in a scarf. Notice verse 13. Uh, Vayehi kishmoa Eliyahu, that when it was so, when Elijah heard it, then he wrapped uh, he wrapped his face in his mantle. Vayalet panav be'adarto. And he went out and stood in the entrance of the cave, and behold, there came a voice unto him. And again God's voice said, What are you doing here, Elijah? Vayomer malacha fo Eliyahu. And he said, I have been very jealous for the children of Israel, for the Lord, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, your prophets, and so forth. They've slain them with the sword, and even I am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So it is interesting as we look at his response. A man dared not look directly at the Lord lest he die. So he wrapped his face in a scarf, and we're told then in verses 15 and 16 that to convince Elijah that the nation which had cast him out and had gone on worshiping Baal despite Mount Carmel, would be judged, the Lord commissions him to anoint 3 persons who were destined to avenge God's controversy with the rulers and the people of Israel. A king was customarily anointed, as was a priest, but there is no Old Testament reference elsewhere of a prophet being anointed. So, what seems to be going on here, anointing here is probably used synonymously with appointment, and it is applied to all that are named. However, Elijah will not anoint any of these. Elisha will cause a disciple to anoint Jehu. We see this in 2 Kings 9, 3 and 6. Elisha himself may have anointed Hazael, but the text does not positively say so. Elisha's anointment was a metaphorical one. Oil was not used, but instead Elijah symbolically cast his mantle on him. In any case, all 3 were destined to be permanent instruments in achieving the overturn of the house of Israel. Jezebel's and the followers of Jezebel's Baal, though in different ways, having thus rekindled the zeal of the frightened and depressed prophet, who had for a time lost his sense of purpose and his confidence in his God-given mission. The Lord further revived Elijah's spirit by correcting the idea he was nursing, that he alone was the sole person in Israel devoted to God. For God, who sees in secret and knew all that were his, knew that 7,000 persons had not bowed their knee or done homage to Baal, had not bowed their knee, but had literally continued to follow the Lord, and predicted that these would be saved from the judgments carried out by Hazael, Elisha, and Jehu. So, as we look at these verses 15 and 16, it reads that the Lord said unto him, Go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you come, anoint Hazael, king of Amram. So we have Hazael, the Melech al Aram, anoint, Meshachta, him. And then the son of Nimshi shall you anoint to be king over Israel, which would be Jehu. And then finally, Elisha, the son of Shaphat, Elisha ben Shaphat is the next one that is to be anointed. So basically, he then comes to tell him that these would bring judgment, but yet in verse 18, he reminds him that he's not the only one, as we have said. It reads, Yet I will leave 7,000, V'hisharti b'Yisrael, Shiv'at alafim. I will leave 7,000, Kol ha-birkayim, all the knees which have not bowed to Baal. Asher lo kara'u leBaal, and every mouth which has not kissed him. V'chol hapeh asher lo nashach lo. So he reminds him that there's 7,000. He's not alone. There's 7,000 that have not bowed their knee to Baal. One of the things that I think we often hear, and even today, that there's no one left. Everybody has abandoned Christianity. But there's always 7,000. The Lord said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so we can take encouragement knowing that the Lord is going to carry out and build his kingdom, even though there's a lot of unbelief. And that is true all through time, including, I believe, our day and time as well. There are many who love the Lord, in spite of what we hear in terms like a post-Christian time. So we move to verse 19, and we're told, he departed and found Elisha. Notice he found Elisha, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. And Elijah passed over unto him, and notice what happened. Vayashlek ha'adarto, and he cast his mantle and used 12 teams of oxen, and could give a great feast, which we see in verse 21 as well, for all the farmhands. It would seem that his family must have been relatively wealthy. He must have been a relatively wealthy landowner at the time. And we may also infer that Elisha, and by extension, his family, to which he belonged, were fully devoted to the worship of Yahweh. This message also reflects the closeness of family life in ancient Israel, with sons and their families living in close proximity to parents who retain their authority, with a kind of communal organization of farming tasks. Seems to be the background here. So Elijah threw his coat across his shoulders. Notice in verse 19, the text we had read, Elijah passed unto him, Vayashlek adarto elav. The text I had just read, Elijah throws his cloak over his shoulders. In short, This act on Elijah's part was an investiture of Elisha with the prophetic office. Obviously, Elijah knew a lot about the character and potential of Elisha, and perhaps Elisha had been given training in some school of the prophets. We don't know. Um, a Hebrew prophet wore a coat to distinguish him in his office, it seems, from 2 Kings 1:8. It was a goatskin covering worn hair side out, and one can appeal to 2 Kings 1:8 and Zechariah 13:4 and Matthew with John the Baptist 3:4. When one senior prophet wished to designate his successor and transfer his power to him, he draped his mantle over him momentarily. The Lord seems to have given the charismatic gift and power at this time, it would seem, to Elisha. So then in verse 20, we're told, he left the oxen and ran after Elijah. And he said, let me, I pray you, kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you. And he said unto him, go back, for what I have done to you. Go back. And he returned from following him, and took the yoke of oxen, and slew them, and boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen, and gave unto the people, and they did eat. Then he arose, and went after Elijah, and ministered unto him. It's interesting. Go and return for what I have done for you. Go and talk with your parents, by all means, but return. Keep in mind the ceremony I have just performed on you. It is not I, but God who calls you. So do not allow any lower affection to keep you from obeying his call, seems to be the point. And so, as this chapter concludes, they all celebrate a great feast, having hastily prepared a farewell feast for his family and friends. Elisha left his native place and attached himself to Elijah as his associate and helper. The burning of the oxen with their instruments probably symbolized Elisha's final break with his former life and the beginning of the new. My mind is often drawn to the New Testament, where the apostles leave their fishing and follow Christ. And as we'll go through Elisha, there'll be a lot in his life which seems to parallel the life of Christ. But at this point, Elijah, he becomes a disciple of Elijah. One of the things that I think we're seeing here is that the call of the Lord needs to mean, or means, that we need to follow that call. And if the Lord has called, he's called everybody to be something that's pleasing to him, whatever gift that is. And I think the challenge is to faithfully fulfill it. Paul said, woe unto me if I preach not the gospel. And I think those of us in the ministry can relate to that. I remember when I was in college and I felt the divine call of God upon my life to enter the ministry and continue studying. So everybody has a calling. It will vary, but the challenge is to follow that calling and try to finish the course. And so Elisha now is going to follow Elijah. And as we move on, we'll see more about Elisha and what he does. I think I'll stop here.